Winnen, veel winnen, heeft hetzelfde effect als cocaïne. Met de verkiezingen in het vooruitzicht praat ik met de Ierse neuropsycholoog Ian Robertson. Hij schreef het boek Het Winnaar-effect over het effect van macht en succes op ons brein en dus op ons handelen. En speciaal voor onze verkiezingen vergeleek hij 3 speeches van 3 van onze politici, Wilders, Roemer en Rutte, en vergeleek die met 51 andere internationale politieke leiders. Hoe groot is de machtshonger van onze politici en wat betekent dat voor een eventueel premierschap? De komende 25 minuten is mijn gast Dr. Ian Robertson. Mr. Robertson, well, welcome.
Thank you.
To cut to the chase, have you discovered anything alarming about our politicians?
Well, there's one Dutch politician who really has a very high need for power, insofar as you can deduce that from analysing the language that the politicians use, and that gives you a very approximate measure of how much they have an appetite for power.
So there is a politician, a Dutch politician, with a very, very strong appetite for power.
Yeah, way above the appetite for power that is the average for people, world leaders who are actually in power. So a huge appetite for power.
Okay, we'll return to your research and the findings a bit later.
Yeah.
But first I would like to talk to you about the book, Het Winnaar-effect, the winner effect. How does winning affect us?
Well, winning in both men and women causes testosterone, the hormone testosterone, to rise. And that hormone causes changes in the brain. It triggers one of our chemical messengers in the brain called dopamine.
Yes.
And dopamine is critical chemical messenger for feel good. You know, anything, when we get a pay rise or when someone pays us a compliment, or if we have sex, then dopamine activity mediates that good feeling we get with these rewards.
So winning always does feel good?
Yeah, winning acts through the dopamine system, and that's where cocaine acts as well. And so extreme success has effects that mirror those of pleasant experiences and drugs that make us feel good.
So you see the same movements within the brain as if we were taking hard drugs?
There's a common pathway, yeah. But not just hard drugs, also alcohol, all of these things. There's one pathway for reward in the brain, and success and power affect that pathway.
Are you a winner yourself?
Well, everyone is a winner and everyone is a loser to some extent, because there's always someone better than you. So there is a trap. If you want to always be the winner, if you want always to be best, that can be very stressful, because there's always someone better than you and you're only as good as your last success. So winning brings stress with it, and that's one of the things that happens to leaders, is that, yes, they become very hooked on winning and success and power, but they also become more vulnerable and maybe fearing what happens if they don't win the next time. So it can be quite...
Does winning then have the same effect on everyone?
No, not on everyone. If you're a highly competitive, highly motivated person who has to beat others all the time with a high need for power, then winning will cause a surge in testosterone, and it will make you feel less anxious. You'll get a drop in the stress hormone cortisol. So it'll make you feel good. If you're someone with a low need for power, winning can sometimes be stressful, and you can actually find it that your cortisol, your stress levels go up. So it depends. Some people have an appetite for success and winning and for power, and
how much of that appetite is determined by nature or nurture?
It's probably a combination of things. I mean, people with higher testosterone levels will tend to have a higher need for power. That being said, men have more testosterone levels than women, but both of them seem to have quite a high need for power.
It's equal between men and women?
Yeah, but there's one important difference, that you can want power for selfish, egotistical reasons, and you can also want it for social reasons. So professions like teachers and nurses have actually quite a high need for power, but we call that S-power. They want power to have an impact for the better in the lives of the people they're looking after or they're teaching.
So S is for social power.
Social power, and P is for, the other one is for personal power. Everyone has a bit of both, but if you have a high motivation for S power, as well as some P power, the effects of power on your physiology, on your brain, are less strong. and you're probably less likely to get addicted to it. So ideally, we want politicians who have not only, everyone has to have the P power, there's always ego involved, but you want to have a bit of social motivation in the power, because that will make it less likely the power will become addictive. It'll be much easier to give up that power once you have to.
Well, because do you have more P power or S power?
Well, I for about 3 years, I worked for 3 years as a Pro-Vice Chancellor of the university where I work.
Yes.
That was planned, it was for 3 years. And I didn't know anything about power then at all. But it was while I was working in that job, I suddenly realised I had power, but I didn't particularly enjoy it. I mean, I wielded it, but it didn't do anything for me.
So you didn't get a kick out of it?
I didn't get a kick out of it. And that was the first time I realised that power is an interesting phenomenon,
yes,
and that affects people differently, and that's why I started writing the book. So I don't have a particularly high need for power. I mean, the three basic needs for human beings are for power and control, for achievement, and for affiliation, that is, for being accepted by other people. These are the three basic motivations. They're all largely unconscious. But I would have a much higher achievement motivation. I want to, I suppose, get recognition, write books, things like that, and have less of a motivation to have control and power, control over other people's resources, which is what power is.
But how much influence do you have yourself on being a winner?
Well, you have influence because the winner effect, which is the title of the book, is a phenomenon in biology, which means the best recipe for success and for winning is to win.
Yes, and how do you do that?
Well, classically you build confidence by setting yourself small goals to achieve and then achieving these goals.
And if you have achieved a goal, does something structurally change in your brain?
Yeah, well, yes, it does. The dopamine levels go up. And particularly if you're in a competition with other people. Now, this has been shown in animals particularly.
Yes.
But if you get two animals, say two mice, to fight, and you drug one of the animals so that he's easier to fight, then it's going to be easier for the other mouse to win that fight. And then you give the same mouse another fight against a really tough opponent, a really vicious mouse. He's more likely to win because he has won already against the weak mouse.
And what makes you a better opponent?
Well, what happens is you can't look into the brains of humans in the same way as you can look into mice. But when you look into mice, winning causes new receptors in the brain to grow, extra receiving stations for testosterone, so that the brain becomes, so that when there's another contest, even a few weeks later, the testosterone that's automatically triggered when you have a competition or a contest has a bigger effect because there are more receiving stations for that in the brain. Now, we don't know that that happens in humans, but we think it's very likely that it does.
And if you have more testosterone, you're more likely to win?
What the testosterone does, it affects two critical parts of the brain, at least, apart from the reward center, but it makes you more aggressive and it makes you more motivated. Now, the Americans have in boxing, they've used this principle all the time. So Mike Tyson, when he came out of prison after serving 3 years for rape, he was given 2 boxing matches against what the Americans call tomato cans. And tomato cans are boxers who are not very good. But Mike Tyson had 2 matches against Peter McNeely and Buster Mathis Jr.
He was sure he was going to win those.
And he won both of them. And then his third match, which was several months later, was against Frank Bruno, who was the world champion then. And he took the world championship from Frank Bruno. So Don King and the American boxing promoters have known about the winner effect for many years before scientists knew about it.
He needed to build up that testosterone and those receivers.
He became, the winning made him more aggressive and more motivated to win, and therefore he was more likely to beat Frank Bruno in the championship.
So winning sounds like something we need, like a positive thing that we need to survive.
Yeah.
And when does winning become a negative influence?
So in our brain, for many of the critical chemical messengers in our brain, like dopamine and noradrenaline, there's an inverted U curve where we call it the Goldilocks zone. So Goldilocks didn't like her porridge too cold or too hot. So there's an optimal level where your brain functions at its best, because dopamine increases make your brain, the front part of your brain, function better.
Yes.
So, but if you have too little, it underfunctions, and if you have too much, it underfunctions. So the critical thing is to get the optimal levels. And some people, if you give them power, actually it makes them smarter, it makes them better, it makes them bolder, it makes them more goal-focused. And that's a good thing. Some people who give power really benefit from it. But other people, or if the power is too much, it pushes them over the other side, and you get too much dopamine, too much testosterone, too much dopamine, and that disrupts the brain functioning.
And what happens?
Particular thing that happens is your ability to think of risk, your ability to think of the downside of events, your ability to empathize with other people. Because if you have a lot of power, there's not the same need for you to consider other people's emotions or thoughts, because you have control, so you don't have to consider other people's perspectives, so you become egocentric. So if you got extreme power, like for instance Napoleon or Adolf Hitler, people ask, why particularly Adolf Hitler, why did he invade Russia when, at the time he did, when he had the example of Napoleon the previous century? Why did he do that? Well, partly was his judgment had been probably so altered, and his brain's functioning had been so changed by the huge amounts of dopamine and the huge amounts of power that he wielded.
And there was no one able to restrain that power.
There was no one. I mean, even his most senior generals, he overruled and took major decisions about military matters that they should have been making, and they were too scared to do that. And I think a similar thing happened in our banking crisis.
Yes, that's what I was thinking, because that is. But I was also thinking we had some restraints built into the system of the banking world.
Yes.
So what were the warning signs in that particular crisis that were ignored?
Well, so let's compare it with politics. In politics, you have, at the moment, we have an election in Holland coming up.
Yes.
That's a huge constraint on politicians, the fact that you have to be elected. You have a judicial system, you have an independent judiciary, and you have a free press that are making criticisms and comments all the time. These are enormous constraints in politicians.
So the whole democracy system...
Democracy was invented to counteract the biological effects of power on leaders' brains. That's what democracy was largely invented to do. The trouble in the banking sector and in things like Rupert Murdoch's press empire, you don't have the same constraints on a highly dominant CEO, for instance, of a major bank.
But there have been so many people that must have been seeing what was going on and decided not to tell or not to speak up.
They had... Don't forget, with 20 years of constantly increasing share prices, constantly increasing profits, constantly increasing bonuses, an awful lot of these people had never actually been confronted with the downside of a financial sector. So, and what they got was enormous rewards. The reward system was constantly stimulated. And when you get that constant stimulating of your reward system, your whole attention of your brain becomes focused on getting more rewards. People become greedy. And so when you wake up in the morning, you think about what your bonus is going to be and about what your profits are going to be and how you're going to improve the profits of the company. And that's the left front part of your brain does that. The right front part of your brain is more associated with perceiving risk and threat. And that's associated with another chemical messenger called noradrenaline. But that side of the brain gets inhibited.
And normally that should be in balance.
Normally there should be a bit of balance there. And most of the time we think of a goal and we want to achieve it, but then we think, ooh, what might happen if we don't get it? But if you have 20 years where your reward system is being stimulated by enormous bonuses and enormous profits, not just you, the trader or the banker.
It's just one muscle that you train too much.
It's just you're actually altering the brain and training the brain to focus on rewards, and attention's becoming skewed.
Could you say that because the economic crisis was dominated mostly by men, that it was key to the crisis?
I've little doubt that had we had a better balance, gender balance, in the banks and the financial sector, it would have been less likely to have happened what happened. If you think of one of the early outliers of the crisis was the Enron collapse in 2002. And that was brought down by a woman, Sharon Watkins, who blew the whistle. She was the only person really to blow the whistle, wrote a letter to Ken Lay, which was ignored. So I think
but you already said that. You also said that we have the same, like, maybe appetite for power.
Yes, but on average, women have more of the S power.
Yeah, so you have the need, you create the testosterone?
Yeah, yes, but if everyone's got an egotistic, everyone to some degree wants power for egotistical P reasons. But people vary a lot in the extent to which they want to have power for the greater good of humanity, if they like.
Yeah.
Women tend to have more of that S power. And if you're concerned...
But it's something that's built into our nature?
Well, where it comes from, it's probably to do with socialization and to do with the way we're brought up. And
so more nurture than nature?
I'd say it's more nurture than nature. There might be a part of it may be the different levels of testosterone that men and women naturally have. That could be. So it's probably, like most things, a balance between nature and nurture.
Yes.
Yeah.
So you have analysed and compared the leadership traits of 3 of our politicians.
Yes.
You already said there was one politician with a great need for power.
Yeah.
So if I had to choose between Wilders, Roemer and Rutte, I would say Wilders.
In terms of need of power, yes. Absolutely, yeah. Now, obviously there are political ideologies. There's a political party and there's people involved. So it's not just the individual psychology you're analysing when you analyse the speeches.
Because what did you analyse?
So I took 3 speeches from each of these 3 politicians.
Yes.
And what you do, it's a psychologist, political psychologist called Margaret Herman, developed a way of trying to remotely assess personality at a distance from people's speech. Because the problem about the need for power is largely unconscious. I only became gradually aware of my need for power, which was quite low, just by virtue of exercising it. But most of the time we don't know whether we have power or not. But the people who work for us, they know.
They feel it, they know it, they want it.
They know it, yeah. Well, the people who are under your power are very aware.
They notice it.
They know. If you ask anyone to think of bosses they've had and say, which of the bosses do you think were affected by power? Everyone can think of bosses, maybe not their boss, but someone else's boss.
Yeah, and so they use different language?
They use different language. So if we take power, for instance, the language of people with a high need for power is full of words to do with having an impact, having an influence, great concern with reputation, and wanting to control and influence events. And so this desire to change things. Tony Blair, for instance, the ex-British Prime Minister, he had a very high need for power compared to other world leaders. Now,
but you're looking at speeches that have been almost certainly also been written by speechwriters and
of course they have
very well thought of. All the words are really well.
That's right. And of course, but political parties come together. And certain people are attracted to these parties because of their particular personalities, and some parties are more focused on these aspects of gaining power, and so there's a combination of the leader represents, if you like, almost a personality trait of certain parties. So yes, it's not perfect, and other people do have that involvement. But the fact is, statistically, presidents of the United States with a high need for power, those with the highest need for power, are more likely to be involved in wars, for instance. These things do predict.
So Wilders, you said he has a great need for power.
Yes.
Can you compare him with any other leader in the world?
Well, I mean, Tony Blair had a very high need for power. He was top kind of 5%, but Wilders is far, far higher in the assessment of language than Tony Blair was. Now, I think that Tony Blair's high need for power had the good side of it was he did a great job in helping sort out the Northern Ireland situation Sierra Leone, Kosovo. He was very courageous and bold, and that's what power does to you.
And
But
that
then
triggered also the winner effect.
Yes, absolutely. And then when it came to, he believed he could do anything. And one of the things about power is it really builds this confidence that any goal you set you can achieve.
Yes.
And Tony Blair had very few failures. Very few failures.
To compensate for the
and
winning.
then so he really believed he could change the world with
Yeah.
George Bush in Iraq, and that was a disaster. It was a terrible, terrible thing he did.
So what did you find out about our last Prime Minister, who is in the race still now?
Yes,
Rutte.
he was interesting because even though he has experienced power, his need for power was slightly less than the average for world leaders.
That's quite remarkable.
Yes, but it's quite a good thing as well, in a sense, given that we're comparing the need for power in people who have power. My feeling is that we need to select politicians carefully so they're more likely to be in the Goldilocks zone of power. So his assessed need for power is relatively lower, slightly lower than average just now. When he gets power, that probably will go up a bit.
Yes.
Because of the effects of having power. And we want leaders who are not going to be knocked over the other side of the curve. So I think, for instance, Angela Merkel, I mean, she has wielded enormous power over the whole of Europe. But she doesn't strike me as a woman who has been
Who's got over
badly affected by it. Yes, people resent Germany's power, but she seems to me to be been quite a steady hand in the tiller. If you compare with the ex-president Sarkozy of France, for instance.
Berlusconi.
Or Berlusconi, yeah. But particularly President Sarkozy, had he had a second term, we would really have felt the effects of a second term of power within Europe on, the kind of rather the way he dealt with and handled the rest of Europe. So I think Angela Merkel is a very good example of someone who probably has a relatively low need for power, like Mr. Rutte.
And then power turns out to be very effective and very good.
Power has you get the beneficial effects of power without going over the top and having the negative effects for power would be my assessment.
So Roemer, he is the frontman of the SP here in Holland. He was doing really well in the beginning of the campaign, but now he seemed to stumble down a little bit.
Yes.
Could you already foresee that in your research?
I couldn't have predicted that. He came across as a man with all three of the leaders have relatively low self-confidence compared to other world leaders. But that may be a feature of analysing speeches during an election. And everyone maybe has to play down the egotistical aspects to some extent, and because here we have a period when the population has power over the politicians.
Yes.
So maybe we're getting a slight bit of the loser effect. The politicians are, for a while, they're having to think, what are the voters thinking? Are they going to vote for me? So the politicians' self-confidence and maybe even their ability, cognitive complexity is slightly reduced by the fact that the balance of power is tipped between the population and the politicians. That will change after the election.
Yes, I guess. So if we say that Wilders has a really strong need for power, and let's say that he would become our next Prime Minister, how could we protect ourselves against that sort of power? And is it dangerous?
It's very dangerous. That's why you need to really protect the constitutional aspects, the checks and balances of the legal system. I mean, if you take President Berlusconi, Prime Minister Berlusconi, when he was Prime Minister of Italy, in Italy the press is hugely controlled by him.
Yes.
Even the government-owned press was influenced by him when he had it. So it was very difficult to get that constraint on democracy of the free press. In Italy, you had attempts to influence the judiciary, the judicial system, and by his government, and you also had, you had the manipulation of the elections via the media.
Yes.
So that was a case of where you have to use these methods of democracy to try and constrain power.
So if you're based on your research, who would you like to see as our next Prime Minister?
I would say either the Rumer or Rutte would be fine for me.
Thank you very much
for
this conversation. Ian Robertson. Ja, en volgende week dan zijn we er weer met Gesprek op 2. En dan zit hier Paul Roosmeulen en hij praat met Ton Heerts, de nieuwe man van de FNV, over zijn rol in de formatie en over de toekomst van de vakbeweging. Ik hoop dat u dan weer kijkt. Voor nu, hele fijne nacht.